fond kiss, and then we sever. A farewell, alas, forever. Deep in headstrong tears I'll pledge thee, warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee. Who shall say that fortune grieves him, while the star of hope she leaves him? Mean a cheerful twinkle lights me, dark despair around benights me. I'll ne'er blame my partial fancy, nothing could resist my Nancy, but to see her was to love her, love but her, and love forever. Had we never loved, say blindly, had we never loved, say kindly, never met or never parted, we would ne'er be broken-hearted. Fare thee well, thou first and fairest. Fare thee well, thou best and dearest. Thine be ilka joy and treasure, peace, enjoyment, love and pleasure. A fond kiss, and then we sever. A farewell, alas, forever. Deep in headstrong tears I pledge thee, warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee.
Well, welcome here to another Restore Live. Restore Live, going out live from Scotland. And to this evening, we have a very, very special guest. A man that some people may wonder, why is this man on our channel? And as the stream goes on, I'm sure you're about to learn exactly why it is that George Galloway would be here. So this evening's host is David Griffiths. And without any further ado, what we're going to do is that we're going to hand over to David and George Galloway.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. And it is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce and welcome to the show, George Galloway. Hello, George. You're on mute, George. Oops. You're on mute.
Thank you very much, David. The answer to the question of why I'm on this channel is that you're the host and you're my friend. And we worked together in a very great cause over the last year and a bit. And when you asked me, of course, it was my honor to accept.
Very, very nicely said. Thank you very much, George. So for the benefit of those of our viewers and listeners who may not know too much about you, would you like to give a very brief portrait of yourself in about 30 seconds, just to say who you are and what you've done? That would be really helpful, I think.
Well, I'm a son of the Scottish working class, born in Dundee. I was a factory worker in Michelin tires. I used to make tires. Now I make films and television broadcasts. But in between times, I was a member of Parliament for almost 30 years. I'm a lifelong opponent of the Scottish Nationalist Party and their Green Front allies. And that's what threw you and I together. Because whatever other differences we may have, we reject the idea that Afon kiss and then we sever this island on which we have lived for so long together. It's unconscionable, and therefore all those who feel that way have a responsibility to come together.
Echo everything George said there. Yes, at first glance, it might have seemed that we might make odd political bedfellows, but absolutely not the case. In terms of Scotland's place in the United Kingdom, we are as one and always will be. That will never change. And George touched on a very interesting point there, upon which we'll expand later, and that is how feasible is it to have certain views about certain political views at the same time as holding other views, one of which may contradict the other, it might seem. I believe there is ample room for all sorts of views in the Scottish pro-UK political spectrum, and I think that's testament to the great strength of the anti-nationalist movement, that it does feature people from opposite ends, if you like, of the divide, the community divide, which sadly exists in Scotland. So I think that's a very, very key point. So we will come on to that. So just for those of you who haven't seen this before, I'm assuming most of you have, we've done 2 or 3 shows now. I've been involved in 2 or 3 shows. And the idea of this is to give a Scottish perspective on matters relating to the United Kingdom and the critical importance of keeping the United Kingdom intact. Because as I've said often in this show, Scottish nationalists do not seek independence. They want to break the country apart. They would be very happy partitioning Scotland. We cannot allow this, and we will not allow this. So what we do is we talk to a number of people in this channel just to share their views and to try and get some, if you like, common ground and some sense of unity across maybe some of the communities within the Scottish political landscape. And for that reason, we invited George today. George is indeed an extremely good friend of mine now, and always will be. And he is by far and away the strongest voice in opposing nationalism, the scourge of nationalism, as I call it, in Scotland. And for that reason, George is here today. So what I wanted to do to start was just to share with you, our listeners and viewers, some of the experiences we had earlier this year that George and I went through. George was the founder of a political party last year, and that party, the name of that party was All for Unity. We originally called it Alliance for Unity because of some hassle with the Electoral Commission. We had to change the name, which is all very unfortunate, held us back. But George was the founder, he was the visionary who came up with the idea. I spoke to him very early on and joined in. I wonder, George, if you could just share with our viewers a very brief story of how it came about that you decided that we should form the party.
Well, it seemed to me that you didn't need to be Einstein to work out that if you've got one nationalist party and several anti-nationalist parties, pro-union parties, then in any election, the nationalist party is going to win on a minority of the vote, getting a majority of the seats. Although, as it happens, the SNP currently falls short of a majority of the seats. And so it was a real risk allowing that. It was tolerable to allow it as long as the SNP majority in the Scottish Parliament thus produced did not seek to use the institution and indeed the massive funding made available from the Treasury in London to actually literally break apart the state. If the Catalans and the Basques and others had behaved as recklessly as the SNP have done, then their institutions, devolved institutions, would have been closed down long ago. But our government, for some peculiar reason, has allowed, like a ratchet, the stakes to be continually upped by the SNP majority. So what we get is a minority of Scottish voters vote for a nationalist party, now a nationalist front with the so-called Green Party, nothing very green actually about it. And the other parties settle, apparently happily, for the wages and the expenses that you get from being the forever opposition. And every time the ratchet is turned, the danger of reaching the point of no return comes ever closer. And that's what I felt was underway in Scotland, that they would use, on the face of it illegally, I'm not a lawyer, but on the face of it, it's illegal to use government money from London to actually prepare for the breaking up of the country that's giving you the money. The term ultra vires is constantly in my mind when I see what the SNP are doing, but never seems to occur to the people in London whose money it is they're using. So I came up with what I called the two big ideas, David.
Yep.
And they were immediately embraced by you and others, and that's how we came to work so closely. The first big idea was that we needed to bring about a situation where the best placed unionist candidate was put forward in each constituency against the SNP, so that the Labour, Liberal, Conservative voters could hold their nose if they had to, bite their lip if they had to, but vote for the best place. Now, as it happened, in many places, that was the Labour candidate. But in many places, like my own, it was the Tory candidate. Imagine, I had to, and I did hold my nose, vote for the Conservative candidate. And in my case, in my constituency, that worked. But unfortunately, we had the old ruinous pattern of Labour, Liberal, Tory cutting each other's throats, the SNP sailing rather effortlessly in many cases back to power. And the second part of the big idea was that if you will the means, you have to will the ends. We should be prepared to form a government of national unity. If we can kick the SNP out of power, let's have, at least for a period, maybe one term, maybe two, a government of national unity that would stabilize Scotland's relationship to the rest of the Union and seek to destroy the virus of separatism, which has, I'm afraid, spread so far into our national institutions as to be an existential threat.
Absolutely right. That is exactly what happened earlier this year, listeners, viewers. The idea was All for Unity were putting forward this idea that one candidate would stand in the constituencies, and in the second vote, you would vote for All for Unity candidates, because we fielded several candidates. We fielded a full range of 56 candidates. Those people, as George will attest, came from primarily non-political backgrounds. Yeah. And again, that at first that might seem a little strange, but when you consider the number of career politicians who exist and who operate in Holyrood now, and mainly in the SNP ranks, but not exclusively. But so many of the new influx of SNP MSPs are now ex-councillors. They've come straight out of school, maybe university, not always, into a council role, and then into Parliament, or into the Scottish Assembly, as it should be really called, the executive. And so you're not getting any life experience from these guys. And this was, I think, a great strength of the All for Unity candidates, because we featured, well, I'll let George tell you, because this is a story he's told very often. George, just talk the people through some of the roles previously undertaken by some of our candidates. I think that would be helpful.
We had left, right, and centre candidates. Yep. We had people with no previous political form, as you just said. We had professors, we had farmers, we had soldiers, military officers, we had trade unionists, we had people like me who had been parliamentarians, knew how to use a parliament platform, and knew the corridors of power and so on. So we were eclectic, but we were, I think, an impressive group of people. So what we were saying is, vote for the best placed unionist candidate in the constituency section, vote for All for Unity in the party list. And if we had succeeded, if that had happened, there would now be barely 25 SNP figures in the Scottish Parliament. And that would have been a tremendous relief to the majority of people in Scotland. I think your viewers have to grasp this, because it's oftentimes imagined that the Scots are champing at the bit, straining at the leash to get to the separatist winning post. But the SNP have never, ever had a majority of the people who vote in Scotland. And if you take the people who don't vote and add them in, then they're not even a third of the people in Scotland. And yet, as we saw recently at the COP26, as we see with this parade of Scottish thespians and film star exiles across the globe, they talk as if Scotland is the same thing as the SNP, and it absolutely is not. Let me tell you, I, just by reasons of chance, found myself at Edinburgh Castle yesterday. I was showing my kids the soldiers, that, you know, the changing of the guard, the 1 o'clock gun, the Edinburgh Castle, the British flag flying from it, and there was a very large number of Scottish people in the castle forecourt, and none of them could be described as people that wanted an end to all of this. They're the, if you like, the silent majority, who are never noticed, certainly never showcased. Instead, it's the ugly face of Scottish separatism that is endlessly showcased, even on the BBC, which has plainly forgotten what the first B in the acronym stands for, but doesn't forget the money that the British state gives it to stay alive.
Indeed, it's a source of immense frustration in anti-nationalist circles in Scotland that the press is so, it seems so partisan, frankly, in favour of this ruinous idea of Scottish separatism, and it's a huge frustration. Just a couple of things I just wanted to touch on there. Firstly, what you listeners may not know is, in Scotland, the voting regulations governing Holyrood are such that if you have a party which is represented heavily in the constituencies, that party is, if you like, penalised or handicapped is probably a better word when it comes to the second vote. And it's for this reason that George was the visionary of the idea of voting for different parties. So you would vote for the Conservative Party, let's say, in your constituency, if the Conservative was best placed to be the SNP, and in the second vote for All for Unity. Now, the reason for that was not just because we desperately wanted to be in Holyrood, but the idea of the voting system is, if in your region, because there are 8 regions in Scotland, forgive me just going down this path for a moment, guys, but it just explains why we stood. There are 8 regions in Scotland, and within those regions, there are numerous constituencies. If a political party happens to win one constituency seat in a region, every second vote given to that party is then halved effectively. If they win 2 seats, that every subsequent second vote or list vote is divided by 3, so it is effectively 1/3. What this means, the reason I'm saying this is, I think there were 3 Conservative candidates returned in George's region, South Scotland. That means that every vote which was given to a Conservative list candidate was divided by 4. So for 1 vote for George Galloway, or for All for Unity in South Scotland, was worth 4 votes to the Conservative Party. And that's an absolute fact. It sounds absurd, but it's true. And this is why we said, vote All for Unity with your second vote, because that way you maximise the power of your votes. The main parties, meanwhile, said, no, you've got to vote for us twice. Emotional blackmail was used to persuade people to vote twice for the same candidate, because in many cases, in most cases, in fact, you were voting for the lead candidate, or for the candidate in the constituency, who was using this second vote as a secondary chance of being voted in. And almost all of the MSPs who are currently sitting in the opposition benches were voted in via the list. So votes were literally wasted. The exact figure of constituency votes given to losing pro-UK candidates was 1,117,000. Just think about that, guys. 1,117,000 votes were cast, and they may as well have been torn up and thrown in the bin. They were of no use whatsoever. That's what happened. No constituency vote counts in the second vote. If you're first past the post, if you don't win, your vote's wasted. So this is why we did what we did. And the second thing I wanted to say, and this is where I want to bring George in again, what we saw was the frankly grotesque spectacle of pro-UK journalists writing articles in the lead up to the election saying, for God's sake, don't vote for George Galloway, don't vote for these people, because he'll stop unionist candidates getting in. In other words, he'll stop Conservative or Labour candidates being elected. And you had the unbelievable sight of one supposedly respected political journalist who rehashed the same article, and I kid you not, they're still up there on his Twitter. He wrote the same article about 3 times a week, all personal invective aimed at George in particular, aimed at the party, and telling, frankly, a load of untruths about the mathematics of the vote. And it could not be clearer. I mean, to me, that clearly this guy was being encouraged to do so, shall we say. Whether he was being paid to do so, I really don't know. But how his employer could let him do this is frankly bizarre. So, what you know the gentleman I'm talking about, George? I'm sure. Yeah, and there were others. There was another writer who told us, in all seriousness, oh no, the way to beat the nationalist threat is with a cocktail, a smorgasbord of pro-union options. What? Against a party that's guaranteed 45% of the vote, you think the answer is to have a range of options? That's just insanity. Yeah, how can that possibly be right? You know, a 5-year-old child would see through that. So, what were your views of the?
You summarised it well. The unionist parties pursued a loser's charter. It was guaranteed to lose the unionist side, but that wasn't their real priority, David. Their priority was getting themselves and their own party, let's be generous. It wasn't just because they wanted to make it into Holyrood. They were more interested in the Tories remaining second. Labour were more interested in being second than they were in the unionist camp being first. And they pursued, therefore, what is an absolutely selfish and entirely self-defeating menu. I don't know about a smorgasbord, but I often felt I'd love to tip the contents of a smorgasbord over their heads. But the thing was a loser from the start. Absolutely. For the reasons you gave. If you vote twice for the Tories, then if you do well in the constituency, your second vote is worth a quarter of a vote. Not a vote, but a quarter of a vote. So you need to get 4 times as many people doing so in order to get one additional MSP than if you'd voted differently. And of course, the same was true of Labour, to a lesser extent, the Liberal Democrats. So what we got was actually the worst of all worlds. We got the SNP back, but dependent upon the Green Party. So now we've got not just supercharged nationalism, but supercharged gender politics, because your viewers should know almost the last thing that ever occurs to the Green Party is anything to do with green. In fact, they don't like nature very much. They actually are fetishized, hooked on gender politics, on the whole transmania agenda, on LGBTQ+++, whatever the latest acronym is. They think and dream of little else than these matters. So we get now an SNP government, which was already quite that way inclined, now legislating for things that frankly make the hair stand on end of most people in Scotland. Contrary to the view of the SNP Green Front, Scotland's actually quite a conservative place. It is no less socially conservative than any other part of Britain. It has exactly the same views on, as the surveys show, on immigration, on sexual politics, and so on, as everybody else. But we've now got a government of not just nationalists, but nationalists who are depending for their majority on a Green Party that is, well, startling to say the least.
It's quite true. We coined the phrase the SNP's gardening section for the Green Party, but they'd spend literally no time talking about green politics.
No time in the garden.
Indeed, no time in the garden, indeed. And the latest brainwave from the co-leader of the Scottish Green Party, always beware of a party that is co-leaders. It means they can't even make the single decision. But their new... this woman is now a member of the Scottish Government because they've been given 2 cabinet positions. Lorna Slater has come up with the idea of reusing eating utensils, crockery, and she believes that people in Scotland ideally should carry around their own knives and forks, not plastic, of course.
In their backpack.
In their backpack, exactly.
Because of course we all go around wearing a backpack. I've never in my life had a backpack, but now I must get one, and I should carry a knife and fork in it. What could possibly go wrong? Frankie Vaughan, back in the 1960s, came to Glasgow to try and get people to turn in their knives to a knife amnesty. Now the Scottish government is telling you to carry a knife in your backpack. What could possibly go wrong?
It's true. I have a confession to make. I once had a stint as a stand-up comedian. It was a bucket list thing, just going off topic here, but bear with me. And I told a joke about the difference between, I was in Liverpool, it was for a charity hospital in Liverpool, and I told a joke about the difference between Glasgow and Manchester, which is where I was living at the time. And I said, one difference is in Glasgow, you have a problem with knife crime. And it's got so bad that you now have metal detectors on night buses to check whether you have a knife. And if you don't have a knife, the driver will give you one, so you've got half a chance of getting out of there alive. Now, I said it as a joke, but now these people, the government are doing it for real. They want to give people metal knives because you can't use plastic, guys, and a wooden knife's not much good. Wouldn't cut a steak. So this is what this is how bad it's got in Scotland. So I always say that in Northern Ireland, because remember, many of the viewers are from Northern Ireland, the difference between the constitutional crisis facing Northern Ireland and facing Scotland is that you have people who vote for a party which is hell-bent on breaking up the country, and they take their votes from across a broad spectrum of opinion, bizarrely. The anti-nationalists come from an equally broad spectrum of opinion. But in Northern Ireland, as we know, politics is to a great extent led by religion. It's very sad, but it's true. You will get very few Irish Catholics, I would assume, would vote DUP, and very few Irish Protestants, I would assume, again, would vote Sinn Féin. But that's primarily the way it is in Northern Ireland. In Scotland, it's not. So you get the young, if you like, the demographics. George will know more about this than I do, but mainly young people in the main vote for the SNP or Greens. Older people vote for the more established pro-UK parties, is the way that the trends go. But within that, you get a very, very broad range. As George has said, you get these woke, excessively woke individuals in the Scottish Greens, because that's really what they are. Highly woke nationalists is all they are, and they've come up with idiotic suggestions like this. And we're suffering from appalling legislation in Holyrood. I talked previously about the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act, which is the most ludicrous piece of legislation I've ever known to be conceived in any parliament. The idea that you would stigmatise football supporters and seek to criminalise them for singing songs, to me, is just absolutely insane. So they scrapped it eventually. Now it's been replaced by the Hate Crimes Bill, which is, of course, nothing but an attack on free speech. And this latest legislation was championed by Scotland's very, very peculiar jack of all trades, rent a mouth minister, Humza Yousaf, who is at the moment is now engaged in suing a nursery whom he claimed racially discriminated or sought to exclude his child. This is the level of politics in Scotland, good people. It has reached the stage where the lunatics truly are running the asylum. It's absurd. George, what would you like to say?
Well, I should say that the nursery was found not guilty of racial discrimination, but he's suing them anyway for £30,000. Jack of all trades, master of none, is Mr. Humza, as the state of our health service and other services that he's run previously can testify. It's true that young people mainly support the SNP. It's young people mainly that believe in Santa Claus, but when they get older, they begin to realize that that is a bit of a daft idea. So that's what happens amongst the electorate also. But there's also been a pretty major shift. I'm myself a Roman Catholic, and in the last, I would say, 20 to 25 years, there's been a massive shift in favor of separatism amongst the community into which I was born. So this has changed a lot of things. It has changed the paradigm rather completely. Prior to this last 25 years, the vast majority of Catholic voters in Scotland wanted nothing whatsoever to do with the SNP, which has a very checkered history in relation to them and their religion. So this has actually now begun to be a pretty worrying feature, because a lot of the rhetoric employed by the zealots, the ultras, you might say, of the nationalist cause, borrows from the vocabulary of and the iconography of the conflict in Northern Ireland.
Yes.
And this Ulsterization of Scottish politics is a very disturbing feature. The reason I was in Edinburgh yesterday was to be a witness in a court case of a man that allegedly threatened to harm me online. He denies the charge. As it happened, the thing had to be adjourned. It was a wasted journey, but at least I got to see Edinburgh Castle. But a month or two before, a man was convicted, pled guilty and convicted of threatening to shoot me through the head, a nationalist fanatic. As a matter of fact, he also threatened to shoot the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, Douglas Ross MP, in the head. So this kind of violence, threats of violence, ugly, pejorative descriptions of everybody who's not a Scottish nationalist, all borrowing heavily from the iconography and the vocabulary of the long conflict in Northern Ireland. So this is a very worrying development. The young people we can take care of as they get older and know more and have more responsibilities, know that they've got to pay a mortgage, know that they've got to have somewhere to have a job, to have a life, will win back those young people. And so I'm not pessimistic, David. I think the separatist cause is weaker than it was last May. Maybe we were just a year early, you know. Next May, we might have actually done better in the polls because the shine isn't half falling off the SNP.
Indeed, there is a litany of disasters and scandal threatening to engulf the SNP. The only thing preventing it really is the fact that the press acquiescence, if you like, or press timidity as such in Scotland. They don't. It's very rarely even covered to any great extent. But
well, some of it is bought, you know, David. Some of it is bought and paid for. I mean, if you look at the this so-called National, I'll not say on air what we call it, but the National is a newspaper bought by fewer than 7,000 people a day. Imagine. It is kept afloat by the largesse of the nationalist government. For example, the Nationalist Party has just given them a print run of 1 million copies of a pro-separatist newspaper, which is going to be delivered free through 1 million doors in Scotland. Nice work if you can get it. The STV, we call it SNP TV, the Scottish ITV franchise for most of Scotland. They are heavily dependent on government health commercials and other things, COVID-related things and so on. So what they've done is they've built what Marx called a comprador. The comprador is the circle that surround the power, and they water that circle, as it is with government money, state money, and in this case, perversely British state money. They hate the crown, but they love the half crown in the SNP. And so British state money is used to water the ground around the nationalist project, which has, over the last decade and a half, got wider and wider, that circle, to a worrying extent. And if you were an artist, a comedian, an author, a writer, a broadcaster, who doesn't drink the nationalist Kool-Aid, you can forget it. You can forget about any kind of assistance with your career. Quite the contrary, there will be plenty of people doing their best to cancel you.
Yeah, very true. I mentioned on a previous broadcast an initiative I'd become involved in with the unionist clubs. If you remember, George, we spoke to a couple of the unionist clubs.
Yes.
These are clubs which have sprung up quite widely across Scotland since just before the election and after. And I was talking to some of their senior guys about maybe an open letter calling on Boris Johnson and the UK government to take a hand in what's happening in Scotland, in particular with reference to poor administration by the SNP. And the first couple of businesses we approached said, look, we totally sympathise, but there is no way we can put our names to anything that criticises the Scottish government, because we will be cut out of future bids for work or whatever. But the answer was very, very definitive and very unequivocal, and that is, we'd love to do it, but we can't. We just can't. We fear intervention from the Scottish government, which will damage our business prospects, and that's where we are in Scotland.
Well,
right now.
that's one side of it.
Yeah.
But the other side is even more sinister.
Yeah.
What you then get is a boycott campaign. And it gets to the absurd levels that because Tunnocks tea cakes, which are very nice, by the way,
Yeah.
was visited by, I think it was probably Boris Johnson on a visit to Scotland. They all then go mad for a boycott of Tunnocks tea cakes. They have done it with Baxter's soup, also very nice soup. They would do it with anyone who evinces any kind. If you put a Union flag on your product, expect them to run a crazed boycott campaign against it, which can even include vandalism, destruction of property, and so on. So it's pretty heavy manners, you know. I got threatened with death 3 times in the course of 2021. The police are well familiar with my front door now, not because I've done anything wrong, I assure you I have not, but because they're having to protect me. Police cars come and sit outside my door and to ward off evil. That's pretty sinister in a democratic country. When the only thing I've done is run in a democratic election.
Absolutely right. And this, I remember seeing you on an episode of Question Time once, making a very salient point at the time. I remember Nigel Farage had come to Scotland and had been literally chased down the street and had to take refuge in a pub from what was effectively a baying mob. Now, George, for any of you who didn't see this, George has been in Question Time several times, and there was a journalist, a female journalist, very pro-Scottish, born in Wolverhampton, of course, as most Scottish nationalists tend to be. They tend to be born and raised outside of Scotland, bizarrely. Anyway, she was on saying, well, quite right, Nigel Farage has got no right coming to Scotland. And George said, how dare you? You don't get to decide who comes to Scotland and who gets a platform and who is cancelled. He has every right to speak in Scotland as much as anybody else, whether or not he gets votes, because she tried to make the point, but he doesn't get any votes in Scotland. Well, that's not the point. The point is people should be free to express their individual thoughts, politicians especially. You cannot have a culture which says, we're going to shut that guy up, unless he's saying something which is utterly, utterly objectionable. But even then, you've got freedom of speech laws, and you've got there are laws to cover anything being said which is in any way threatening. So we don't need to be afraid of our politicians speaking. If we are, then you have to question whether we live in a true democracy. And that is how it's becoming in Scotland. It's really frightening stuff. And George made an exceptionally good point before, which is, I'd said, possibly rather in generalisation, you don't get voting patterns based on religion in Scotland. You do to an extent, but nothing like to the extent it is in Northern Ireland. And I hope that continues, because I hope it continues that we don't have identity politics taking over in Scotland, because it is frankly a very, very dangerous path to go down. And I've said this several times in these shows. Nationalism is dangerous. Once it's uncorked, the genie doesn't go back in the bottle. You really are dealing with the most base instincts in people when it comes to nationalism, because it's always based on hatred, envy, resentment of another people or another religion. And Scottish nationalism is no different. No. Scottish nationalists like to portray themselves, George will tell you this, as civic nationalists. Well, there's no such thing as civic nationalism any more than there is civic racism. Nationalism is nationalism. It's as simple as that. You don't get fluffy, friendly, cuddly nationalism. It doesn't exist. So we see this as our duty to fight this. And George made the point, again, forgive me, I always quote George. He made the point the other day, we're not even being paid to do this, but we've got opposition MPs are being paid handsomely to fight the SNP. And I would say we're doing a pretty much a more effective job than most of them. I mean, my colleague as well, Niall Fraser, has been outstanding in raising issues and getting the message across, using videos and interviews. Terrific, very, very talented and really hard-hitting stuff. George is, if you don't follow him on Twitter, please do, because he comes up with everyday absolute gems, which you just don't see in the Scottish press at all. And you don't hear from Scottish MSPs. They're not completely mute. You do get the occasional guys, you know, will say, okay, the SNP haven't done a very good job here, but really it's not in any way commensurate with the appalling misdeeds being carried out in the name of the people of Scotland, which these people most assuredly do not represent. They're supposed to, but they absolutely categorically, manifestly do not represent, for example, the views of non-nationalists in Scotland. They don't. Our views are ignored. And this is why we felt we had to do this. So leading along quite nicely from that, we've talked about what happened with All for Unity last year. A lot of people ask me, and I'm going to spring this on George a little bit here. The question I'm asked most often is, what's George up to and what's happening with All for Unity? Are you guys going to stand next year? Now, I'll ask George to answer that in two sections, if you like. Firstly, George, could you deal with, is there anything you can tell us about All for Unity and the plans for the name All for Unity going forward?
Yes, we've decided that we won't stand in elections again, because the experience was searing. The number of votes that we got, 25,000 or so, was not enough, and there's no reason to believe we wouldn't get the same treatment from the other unionist parties and the media, including those sections of the media that are pro-union, who are not many, but therefore are widely followed by unionist people. So we're not going to stand in elections again. We're just going to be a campaigning organization. And we hope that, therefore, people of all parties will be able to support initiatives that we launch rather than see them as a threat. We hope that we'll be able to build and create sinews of campaigning ability, so that someone, see, the one thing that Niall Fraser, you and me have in common is that nobody pays us for any of this. We do it entirely out of our wish to stop the breakup of the country. The people that get paid never lay a glove on the separatist side. So if we can help them get better, if we can make arguments for them, and they're welcome to say them. You said I come up with gems. Thanks for that. I do actually daily come up with gems against the SNP. And I've got a big social media following, but I don't have any political power. If the people in political power will feel unthreatened enough, pardon me, by me, to start using our arguments, using the papers we're going to produce, support the events and agitation that we are going to create and maintain, then we'll, I think, get further than we were able to get as an electoral force. And in the end, if the big three unionist parties will not cooperate, then by running in elections, you're actually only making it worse. Yeah. We were running in elections to try and force them to unify, to get their act together. But we failed in that, and we see no real reason to believe that we'll succeed in the future. So from now on, this is probably the last interview I'll do in which I attack the other parties, because it's my job from the end of this month, when we hope to register as a campaign organization, to unify people that we have actually been extremely critical of, I think with justification, but the time has come to try and build a united front. Unity is strength, of course. That's the background from which I come as a trade unionist. I didn't set out to be a unionist. I'm a transport and general workers unionist. I just don't want the country to break up, because I believe that everybody will be worse off if that happens, and particularly the working people that it's my job to represent.
Indeed, just to pick up on that, I made the point last week that, in fact, in the speech I gave in George Square 3 weeks ago, I say that quite blithely. just fanciful. But thanks to this gentleman here with whom I'm talking this evening, I now feel that I am able to do so, and I love doing it. It's something I've discovered I can actually do without feeling nervous. So it's terrific. So thanks for that, George. That was terrific. But
You've been great.
Thank you. But what I was going to say is, God, what was I going to say there? Oh my goodness! Talk about losing your thread. Hold on a sec. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, we were saying about the parties of whom we've been critical. That's true. We have been very critical, almost to the extent that, I was talking to one of the major parties, and they said, "Well, we noticed that you were actually very critical of us leading up to May's election." And I said, "Yeah, I was. But then you were very critical of me and of our founder and of our party leader and of our very ethos. So you were trying to keep me out of Holyrood just as much as I was suggesting it would be a good idea to put me in." So I think George's summary is correct. His analysis is correct. If we stood again and there was no desire on the behalf or on the part of the pro-UK parties to stand their candidates down, which there wasn't. It didn't happen at all in May's election. It's unlikely to happen next time. Labour and Conservatives don't work in tandem here. For you, for the viewers in Northern Ireland, I know there is some. There has been historically some cross-party, if you like, how would you put it? Understandings in Northern Ireland where the UUP and the DUP will stand down candidates to allow their candidate to have a free run at elections. I know that that's under strain right now. In Scotland, that doesn't happen at all. It just doesn't happen. You get really bizarre coalitions sometimes in councils. So you'll get half Labour, half SNP council, that sort of stuff. But you won't get the Labour Party voluntarily saying, "I tell you what, we probably won't win in Glasgow Eastwood, so we'll stand down our candidate. Could you maybe stand down your candidate in Dumbarton where the Conservatives won't?" It doesn't happen. So we have this farcical situation that the Conservative Party and the Labour Party were fighting against each other. And in the last few weeks of the election, I can't remember if I told you this, George, but I spoke to my MSP, Jamie Green, who's a Conservative in North Ayrshire, and he said to me at the count, "Yeah, as soon as you guys got to 4%, we had to turn our fire onto you. We couldn't have you knocking out our MSPs in Ayrshire." And he started listing the names of the MSPs who were felt to be under pressure of losing their seats. And that's why the last 2 weeks of the election, the Conservative Party in Scotland were attacking George Galloway and All for Unity rather than the SNP.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. So you don't get, and this is really the reason I'm saying this is just so that the guys in Northern Ireland understand that there's the idea of pro-UK unity is a myth. It doesn't happen. So George's point is right. If we stood again, we'd just be a fourth person at the table trying to get a slice of the pie. There's no point in that at all. So,
well, as you explained, David, many times in the campaign, and again this evening, it only took a quarter of the votes to elect me than it would have taken to elect an additional Conservative. And moreover, I would have done a better job fighting the SNP on the floor of Holyrood. I don't think anyone would deny that, than John Doe, the additional Conservative or Labour or Liberal MSP. But there's no point in crying over spilt milk. It was a bit of a narrow escape in a way for me. It's no fun, I think, being in Holyrood. It has failed. It's a miserable failure. There are many people who think it should be closed down. I think that's probably impossible now. But if you were to close it down and give the powers back to the councils, give the money back to the councils to spend, I don't have any doubt that governance in Scotland would be better. But it's not just about pounds, shillings and pence for me, David. The truth is, attempts to suggest that Scottish and English people are different people are so far off the mark. Who among us was not in agony on Sunday when we heard the news about an attempted suicide bombing of the Liverpool Women's Hospital? Who among us considers the Beatles to be foreigners? Who among us is not interested in whether Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is going to pick up Manchester United's fortunes or whether Cristiano Ronaldo's going to score in the last minute of the Champions League. The idea that we are two separate peoples is completely wrong. And the idea that English people somehow discriminate against English people. I saw that plonker, Alan Cummings, claim that he was discriminated against because of how he spoke when he lived in England. This is the opposite of the experience of 99% of Scots that live and work in England, as both you and I have in the past done. It's the opposite of our experience. Scottish people are not just not discriminated against, but have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams in many cases, in all kinds of industrial spheres and political spheres. Tony Blair's government had many things wrong with it. But one of the things it didn't have wrong with it was that it had too few Scots in it. It had a disproportionate number of Scots in it. So attempts to cause division between us are not just not going to put more potatoes on our plate. They cheapen and coarsen the whole essence of living on this green and pleasant land.
Indeed, extremely well said, and I feel exactly the same way. The point I was making on that issue at you remember there was an appalling bomb in the Manchester arena at the Ariana concert. Now, every time I look at that, I get chills, and I feel chills now because as you see the video footage of the bomb going off, there's a gentleman standing in the foreground of the famous video, and he's my friend from Troon who's waiting to pick up his daughter. And so you can't for a minute think that experiences and anything issues that affect people in England, particularly the north of England, don't affect people in Scotland, because I can assure you they do. That it's only providentially my friend Robert's daughter was safe, but my God, and that really did bring it back to me. And I've, as George has said, I've lived more than half my life in England. I've worked for many years in London and in the northwest. In the very early days when London was a little bit more of a shall we say, a less enlightened society, yeah, there was some joking about Scottishness, but it was all very good natured. It wasn't racism. It wasn't any such thing. It's ridiculous. And in Manchester, particular, and Brighton, another city I've spent a lot of time. You're absolutely right. Scots were loved. Scots were actually thought of as being very romantic and very what's the word? Exotic.
Yeah.
In Brighton, believe it or not, because they really. So that's just a tip for any Scots or Northern Irish people listening. Go to Brighton, the ladies will love you. Sorry, I don't mean to be sexist, but it's true. Anyway, so yeah, I have rejected out of hand these suggestions that Scots are in any way put upon in this union. And a point I also made in one of these talks: the very idea that we're using the phrase union. This isn't a union; it's a country. The United States was a union of 50 states. It's now a country. You don't get Tennessee or Louisiana saying, "Hang on, we don't like the president. I think we'll secede. Why don't we just break away?" Ridiculous. Prussia doesn't try and break away from Germany. Doesn't happen. This is just living in the past, and it should be consigned to the past. This nonsense about this is one reason that I started. I came on with George in the first place is that he identified correctly that the SNP is in fact an alliance. It's not just the SNP of old, which was frankly a few eccentric guys saying, wouldn't it be great if we were back in the time of Bonnie Prince Charlie, or whatever it was, the time in history they want to go back to. Now, it's very hard left ex-Labour voters. It's the demographic George has talked about, the Irish Catholic diaspora who have settled in Scotland, who vote all seemingly in the main vote the same way. You've got the young people, the pseudo Greens as well. It's an amalgamation of a lot of disparate strands of political thought, all united in wanting to break up the country. That's what they seek to do. It is almost impossible in a single issue election or a single issue campaign to beat an alliance without an alliance, and that's why we thought we sought to do it. So, as George said, there's no point going over what happened, but just to say that our idea was so good that Alex Salmond sought to copy it. Cut and paste. He actually did, didn't he? He stood with the idea of, the SNP getting the constituency seats and his party getting the backup, but it didn't happen. Anyway, so I know that we've had George for an hour now, so we're going to start to wrap this up. I wanted to give George an opportunity just to say, because he's a Labour politician for many years, he's no longer in the party. It's fair to say George is not particularly fond of the Labour Party these days, in as much as certainly the personnel involved and the direction in which it's going. So I wanted just to give George an opportunity to tell us a little bit about another party of whom you may not have heard, with which George has some association these days. George.
Well, thanks for that opportunity, and thanks for the interview. I've enjoyed doing it. I'm the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. We have branches from Penzance to Perth. In Scotland, we have getting on for 10,000 members, which is a long way short of what we'll need to be, but is a very good start in just 2 years since we were founded. We do what we say on the tin. We are for the workers, not the wokers. We're not remotely interested in your color, your religion, your sexual practices, your sexual orientations. We're only interested in fighting for your rights and progress as a working person. The vast majority of people are workers in Britain, but we don't believe that they get the respect and the things that they ought to have and deserve. So we believe in an independent Britain, a sovereign Britain. We believed in Brexit. We fought for it and still believe in it. We believe that Britain should be the green and pleasant land that it can be, and that's what we stand for. So if you like the sound of that, please do look at our paraphernalia. Our Twitter handle is Workers' Party of Great Britain, and I'll keep fighting on all these fronts as long as I've got breath, and after me, my sons and my daughters, as I say. Thank you very much indeed, David, for the opportunity.
My great pleasure. And what I'd like to just suggest is that maybe once All for Unity's next phase in its evolution is confirmed and ratified, it would be great if you could maybe come on and just tell us a little bit more about what it's going to be as a movement. I think that would be very useful for our listeners also and our viewers. Okay, well, I'll wrap up there, George. Many, many thanks for taking part. It's great to speak to you. Good to see you. I can hear a little voice in the background, so thank you. Yeah, it's fantastic. So many thanks, and we'll speak again soon. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Speak to you soon. Thank you, George, and good night, everyone.
Good night.
There are any number of issues in Scotland that need addressing. Health, education, drug deaths, the economy, but all of those are taking a back seat at this conference to one issue above all else, and that's an independence referendum.
Scotland doesn't want a Boris Johnson government. It doesn't want to leave the European Union, and it wants to be able to determine its own future, whatever that future turns out to be. And this idea that the Tories can just say no and sort of imprison Scotland in a union against its will, I just don't think will hold.
Independence is what the SNP is all about, and Nicola Sturgeon is expected to reinforce that massively at this conference. There will be no chance for people who are against the First Minister's policies to get a hearing.
Well, there you go, people. What do you say? As I said at the very, very start, to some that would come to your screen here at Restore UK, you could have been forgiven for wondering what it is that George Galloway would be doing on a platform like this. But as you will have heard, if you've listened very, very carefully, what I hear is a man that is talking sense in many more ways than one. And, there's a few things there in what George had said that has enlightened me, and I didn't actually know. So what we're going to do here at Restore is that we're going to go back and we're going to cut the video into little bite-sized clips. And over the coming days and weeks, what we will be doing is that we'll be making these small clips, these short clips, available on our platform. I've got to take my hands off to David for inviting George and for the interview that was given. And I have to say, it was very, very professionally carried out. And thank you very much, David, for that. To the people on our live chat, we'll see you all again very, very soon. Thank you very much for coming along and being with us yet again.